Time once again for the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser, and the Wall Street Journal has confirmed what we've been saying on this show for months, that deflation is the boogeyman. Yes, credit collapse and money supply collapse is throwing the world into a deflationary spiral, and now the question is, what's next? But let's talk a little bit more about some zombies and some vampires and some walking dead people. Stacy Herbert, talk to us about what's going on out there.
Well, Max, you mentioned deflation, and of course Japan is the deflationary king. They've had a lost decade, which has gone on now for about 21 years. First headline is from there. Tokyo's oldest man had been dead for 30 years. Yes, Sogen Kato, on his 111th birthday, was considered the oldest man in Tokyo until government officials showed up to congratulate him and found his mummified corpse.
Now, this is a key story because it ties the deflation in Japan with this dead person. and now we're going to talk about another guy who some consider to be the walking dead or a zombie. I think this is where we're going with this. Tell the people.
Alan Greenspan, the financial system is broken. So this is an interview from NBC's Meet the Press. And Greenspan, first of all, he was asked about the conservative, the Republicans' argument that the tax cuts for the rich need to stay in place because even though they'll add $40 billion to the deficit, that they'll pay for themselves. Well, Greenspan first says they do not. I'm very much in favor of tax cuts, but not with borrowed money. And the problem that we have gotten into in recent years is spending programs with borrowed money, tax cuts with borrowed money, and at the end of the day, that proves disastrous.
Yes, the borrowed money has simply been shuttled off to off-balance sheet entities, and it's not included in the national statistical reporting about, let's say, GDP. People don't realize that for every dollar of GDP that has been grown in the U.S. economy the past 15 to 20 years has taken more and more units or dollars of debt, to the point where just recently something like $10 of debt was needed to just create one lousy dollar of, really, you can't even call it GDP really, because the interest on the debt is now getting to be bigger than the combined income of the entire country.
That's correct. And, this also ties in, however, as Alan Greenspan is basically suggesting there, of what I call the Republican theory of relativity. So deficits matter, as you see them screeching right now about Barack Obama's deficits that are spending on population or social programs. But deficits don't matter, they say, when it applies to tax cuts or helping the rich. But it turns out, in this case, it actually does. The same laws apply to both sides. Well, they also say that deficits don't matter, or government spending, socialism, is not good for welfare programs for the poor, but it's good if it's for war, which is another form of government spending. It doesn't matter what they're spending it on, it's still government money.
Right. The Pentagon is the biggest welfare bum there is in America. It's like the Heisenberg principle. From particle physics, you don't know whether a particle is moving, what direction, or how does it go. You don't know the direction, but you don't know its location. And here, a word like debt, it means one thing to one group of special interests, the government, or welfare means something to these folks. But in another context, which would mean some benefits accruing to the population, then suddenly words like welfare mean something completely different. And this has been the amazing reinvention of words and language in America, so that we don't really know what people are saying anymore. When Obama opens his mouth, what comes out makes no sense, because they've diluted the value of words so horribly now in America, where words like debt and GDP and welfare and defense and home security either they mean exactly the opposite of what Obama thinks they mean, or they just don't mean anything at all. It's become like more infantile than even Romper Room. That's a childhood show from the 1960s. He's like that woman in Romper Room. She looked through every day at the children and said, I see special interest groups. I see the tobacco industry. I see the oil industry. I'm leading the Romper Room kindergarten school of public policy. The guy is a complete empty suit.
But this ties in with that first story of the economy's been dead for 30 years. We've been living with a lot of passion and a lot of debate about whether deficits matter if it's given to poor people or if it's given to rich people. I'll turn to a little clip here when the interviewer asks Alan Greenspan about interest rates and whether keeping them low will help cause inflation, because they all agree that they need inflation because we're going through this deflationary collapse akin to what Japan is suffering from.
There is no doubt that the federal funds rate, that is the rate produced by the Federal Reserve, can be fixed at wherever the Fed wants it to be, but which the government has no control over is long-term interest rates. And long-term interest rates are what make the economy move. And if this budget problem eventually merges to the point where it begins to become very toxic, it will be reflected in rising long-term interest rates, rising mortgage rates, lower housing. At the moment, there is no sign of that, basically because the financial system is broke and you cannot have inflation. The financial system is not working.
Yes, the financial system is broken. It's collapsed. It died. So it's a walking zombie. They call Japan the zombie economy. They call Japanese bank zombie banks. Now, in America, it's a zombie economy as well, with dead zombie banks. Citigroup is a zombie bank. The stock is just used as a whipping post, a whipping boy for hedge funds who manipulate it up and down 25 cents one day and down 25 cents the next day. Pure inside information, pure market manipulation. Geithner, Bernanke, and the head of Citigroup, they're involved in wholesale market manipulation every single day. Nobody doubts that.
So Greenspan admits that the markets are dead. The financial system is dead. Now, this takes me to another Republican named David Stockman, and he was the director of the Office of Management and Budget from 1981 to 85 under Ronald Reagan. He writes in the New York Times, 4 deformations of the apocalypse. And basically, he's attacking the Republicans for causing this disaster that we now have. He says for decades now, Republican policy has amounted to little more than money printing and deficit finance, vulgar Keynesianism robed in the ideological vestments of the prosperous class. And the number one reason he gives for why Republican policy is so deformed is going off the gold standard.
That's exactly right.
In 1971, which is 40 years ago.
Without a gold standard, all you have is fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, and fraud. And it led to a monstrosity on Wall Street, the Godzilla, the freak show that is Goldman Sachs, stalking the global financial world, fire-breathing, fraudulent market-making psychopaths.
Well, he says that dropping of the gold standard has allowed America to, quote, live beyond its means as a nation for nearly 40 years. Our cumulative current account deficit, the combined shortfall on our trade in goods, services, and income, has reached nearly $8 trillion. That's borrowed prosperity on an epic scale. But as David Stockman points out, once government officials and the country was no longer having to, the responsibility of maintaining the value of their currency, everybody became just reckless. And of course, it also allowed the building of the neoconservative movement, which is even bigger government than what the Democrats traditionally are. So they were all for a huge expansion of warfare state.
Look, there's a massive situation going on in terms of central banks and game theory. The John Nash equilibrium point. The game theory is being enacted on a massive scale. The first country that introduces a gold-backed currency, that currency will immediately rise to the top of the currency heap, and every other country will have to follow suit or be left behind.
So we talked about dead people and dead economies, and here's more evidence of this in the United States, in this economy that was created by the likes of Alan Greenspan and David Stockman. Comcast to customer, pay us $0.00 or we'll cancel your service. So this is from Gizmodo.com, and they are recalling, and they post a picture of this bill where a customer of Comcast, this big giant telecoms group in America, received a bill for 0 cents and said, either pay up now, you owe us 0 cents, or we'll cut off your service. This customer happened to call Comcast and resolved it. Another customer of Charter Communication, another company, had the same exact situation happen to him. But he just ignored it because he's like, how do I pay 0 cents, right? It must be a mistake, and they know it. No, they cut off his service because he failed to send in the 0 cents and charged him $25 for cutting off the service.
Well, this goes back to a famous case a few years ago with America Online. Famously kept charging a dead person for their monthly service, and the family kept calling up every month, cut off this charge. He's dead. Yeah. But they kept saying, no, he's not dead unless we say he's dead.
But it also fits in with your theory about what the future will hold with this virtual economy. And if you could see this happening more and more, your account is zero, and therefore you're not in debt. You don't have the credits, which are actually available online. So therefore you are bad. You're going to be cut off from the system.
Well, this is something I think that's coming, is that as you see more and more the dollar being really left aside and other currencies embraced, you will also see alternative currencies and virtual currencies embraced, which will tie into this huge network and social network, and sites like Facebook with their own virtual currency and 500 million users. They have the ability to generate their own credits, their own virtual currency, and this will be really an economic theme, as we pointed out on this show before, going forward for the next 6 months.
And then finally, meet the first big exec to pay for, quote, unintentionally defrauding during the credit crisis. Yes, this is the former CFO of Citibank. He's just paid a $100,000 fine for unintentionally defrauding customers of Citibank.
Unintentionally defrauding. This reminds me, remember Oliver North? He committed plausible deniability. Remember when he was involved in the Iran-Contra scam during the Reagan years? He didn't want to say he was guilty, but he could plausibly deny his guilt. So here you have who is this banker?
Gary Crittenden.
He's saying that he's got fraudulence. How did he phrase it?
Unintentionally defrauding. This is what the SEC charged him with. He paid a $100,000 fine. He himself, his last year of employment at Citibank last year, made $20 million. So of that, he paid $100,000 for the actual investors with Citibank's CDOs, which is the case in this particular instance. They lost billions and billions of dollars.
Right. Unintentionally defrauding. And like I said earlier, the words mean nothing anymore in the United States. You can't adjudicate law if the words mean nothing. You can't report on financial news if every single financial figure is cooked, if it's a statistical, basically phantasmagorical, shadow banking system, and it means nothing. And where's the leadership? Where is the leadership? Nobody's home. Lights are on. Nobody's home. Okay. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this half of the show. Stay with us. Plenty more coming your way on the Keiser Report.
Every month, we give you the future. We help you understand how we'll get there and what tomorrow will bring. The best in science and technology from across Russia and around the world. Join us for Technology Update on RT.
All right, welcome back to the Keiser Report. All right, now, we've got a special guest. This is about as close as I'll come to being on the Sea Shepherd up there in the fighting the Japanese whaling fleet. Welcome, please, from Los Angeles, Captain Paul Watson, the founder and president of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, a direct action marine conservation group whose war with the Japanese whalers can be seen every week on the hugely popular whale wars on Animal Planet. Welcome to the show, Captain Paul Watson.
Well, thank you.
Now, Captain Watson, Japan's whaling season, their catch for the year, was cut by 50% over the previous season. Tell us about the Sea Shepherd, its role in making that happen.
Well, I set the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society up not as a protest organization, but as an interventionist group to go after poachers or illegal fishing or illegal whaling operations. And that's what we've been doing since, well, 1977, really. And we started going after the Japanese fleet in 2002. Then we had to come back. We weren't able to come back again until 2005. But since 2005, we've been down there every season intervening, and the object is to cut their quotas, to negate their profits.
Now, let's talk about the contrast, your approach with other, let's call them environmentalists. I remember hearing you talk about this and saying it's okay to take a moral position, it's okay to take them to court, but unless you attack their bottom line, unless you attack them economically, you're really spinning your wheels. Is that a fair statement?
Well, Australia is taking Japan to court, but they've been in the process of doing that for years, and they still haven't been able to do it. And it's not really getting anywhere. Protest certainly isn't getting anywhere. Japan is targeting endangered and protected whales in an established international whale sanctuary in violation of a global moratorium on whaling and in violation of the Antarctic Treaty. And they're in contempt of the Australian federal court for killing whales in the Australian Antarctic Territory. This is a criminal operation. They're no different than elephant poachers in Africa, or no different than drug dealers, really. This is a criminal operation, and that's what we're trying to intervene against.
Okay, so the Nishan Maru, the big mothership of this Japanese whaling fleet, they're out there, as you say, they're violating international law. It's a bit of a lawless area of the world's waterways. It kind of cuts both ways. Your actions some could construe are on the aggressive side as well. But nevertheless, at the end of the year, at some point, the Japanese whaling, at some point, it's just not economic for them to go out anymore. And then forget about the moral certainty or the legal justification. It's just that it doesn't make any economic sense for them to go out there and whale. This message, this economic message, how come it doesn't filter out to other groups that are pressuring various other transgressors, if you will, who are destroying the environment? This very simple economic message. How come nobody else seems to get it, Captain Paul Watson?
I'm not really sure, but I have found over the years that the most successful approach is the economic one. With the Canadian seal hunt, with illegal fishing operations, we intervene, we cut their profits. In the Galapagos, for instance, we've seized 200,000 shark fins. We've busted the shark fin mafia wide open and exposed the corruption down there that supports it. And it costs them a lot of money. And with Japan, I think the only reason the whaling fleet continues to survive is because of massive subsidies by the Japanese government. But they're well over $150 million in debt and subsidies to Japan right now. I don't know how much longer Japan will continue to subsidize them, but we're going to keep that kind of pressure on. It's the one language they understand, profit and loss. And every whale that we save costs them, well, about $250,000.
Oh, so not only are they out there murdering these creatures, they're also government welfare bums, apparently, to add to the list of transgressions. Now, you're a captain. You've been on the high seas for quite a number of years. So let's talk about the ocean ecosystem here. A new study suggests that the oceans have lost 40% of their phytoplankton in the past century. Talk a little bit about what impact this will have on marine life, kind of the oceans. As you say, if the oceans die, we die. Talk a little bit about the phytoplankton.
We have lost about 40% of the phytoplankton, 90% of the large fishes. The coral reef systems are deeply in trouble and will not survive probably for more than another 2 decades. The situation in the ocean is extremely dire. And the fact is that human civilization, our very existence, depends upon a healthy ocean. If the oceans die, then we die. It's as simple as that. With the plankton, although they're reduced, Japan and Norway are setting out large drag trawlers to go down to Antarctica to pull in plankton to make a cheap protein meal for livestock. And they're pulling it out by the hundreds of thousands of tons without any environmental impact as to what the consequences will be from removing all of that plankton. So we're overfishing. Every single commercial fishery in the world is in a state of collapse right now. The United Nations predicts that by 2048 there will be no more commercial fishing. I think it'll be much sooner than that. The problem is that there's really no enforcement of international conservation regulations. We have all the laws and treaties we need to do this, but there's a lack of political and economic will on the part of governments to actually do anything about it. The United States, for instance, could stop whaling tomorrow by simply implementing U.S. Department of Commerce sanctions against Japan and Norway. But every year, instead of implementing the sanctions, they send a so-called strongly worded letter of protest to Japan and Norway, which is promptly ignored. So anytime we try to do anything to stop these people, they have massive lobbies, PR firms, and everything to defend what they're doing. And it's a really a very difficult obstacle to get around. But the fact is that they're breaking the law and they're destroying the oceans, and we're doing the best we can with the resources available to us to slow them down.
You mentioned that 90% of the big fish have disappeared. Tell us about the bluefin tuna in the Mediterranean. What's the law on fishing tuna? Who's breaking the law? And how are they breaking the law, Captain Paul Watson?
The bluefin tuna should have been listed on the endangered species list of the Convention of the International Trade in Endangered Species this year, but the only reason it wasn't was because of vote buying by China and Japan. And every single marine species that was to be listed, 5 species of sharks, 2 species of coral, the polar bear and the bluefin tuna were not listed, and they went ahead with business as usual. But it is deeply in trouble. There's only 14% of the bluefin tuna population that is left, and of course one of the breeding areas for the Atlantic bluefin is the Gulf of Mexico, so we have we don't have any information as to what that oil spill has done on the breeding of the bluefin tuna. But what we also have here is this thing which I call the economics of extinction, that there's money to be made by driving a species extinct. Mitsubishi has built large refrigerated warehouses in Japan. They've already got a stockpile of 4 years' supply of bluefin. They'd like to get 10 to 15 years' supply. The more bluefin that they pack into those warehouses, the more diminished they become in the wild. This fish, one fish, is worth $75,000 to $125,000 a piece. So as they diminish the fish in the wild, the value of the commodity in their warehouses goes up. And what if they can wipe it out? They've got a priceless commodity, $1 million fish, and they'll be able to set the price for the next 10 to 15 years. And then after that, they don't care, because the problem is that fishing operations are no longer run by fishermen. They're run by corporations for short-term investment, for short-term gain, and they really are not interested in the future of the fishery, just maximizing the profits from this venture when they get into it.
Right, so like the De Beers diamond cartel, they simply control the price, and they create an artificial price. But this is remarkable. You're saying that they are perpetrating deliberately an extinction of a species merely to boost the price of the inventory in the warehouse. And this is a key part of the food chain that is a key part of the ecosystem and the habitat that humans are interacting with and need to survive. So they're making a market ultimately on their own extinction. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, diminishment means increased profits. Extinction means they can set the price. They will control what is left. It's the same, for instance, that they're doing with elephant ivory. You know, the more ivory they can get into vaults, the fewer elephants, the greater the price of the commodity, ivory. So it's what I call the politics and economics of extinction.
So there you are on the front line battling the war that really is the only war against the only terrorists, and these are the terrorists that are destroying life on planet Earth. And you're scoring some wins in some battles in the winning column. The Whale War show, of course, hugely popular. The Nishin Maru collision with one of the boats. Was that the cliffhanger of this season, and what can we look forward to next season? Is there what's coming? Can you give us a little teaser of what to expect?
On January 6th, earlier this year, our vessel, the Audi Gill, our fast interceptor vessel, was deliberately hit. It was rammed by the Shonemaru No. 2, one of the harpoon vessels. It was cut in half and sunk, almost killed 6 of our people. It was remarkable that nobody was injured. So we lost a $3 million vessel. What's amazing about this is the captain of the Shonemaru No. 2 has not been questioned by anybody. And I don't know of a case in maritime history where a ship has been struck even accidentally, where the captain hasn't been questioned. Australia and New Zealand did an investigation, but Japan just simply refused to cooperate with the investigation. And what this means, though, is that this gives them a green light. Having gotten away with this, we expect in the next season that they will be much more aggressive, much more violent towards us. Over the last 5 years, they've thrown concussion grenades at us. They've fired rifles at us. They've rammed us. They've done... they use this thing called an LRAD, long-range acoustical device, which is an ear-splitting noise which is designed to cause nausea and disorientation, and they've actually aimed that at our helicopter pilot as well as our deck crew. Now, we respond by hitting them with bottles full of butyric acid, which is simply rotten butter, but makes everything horrendously stinky and very difficult for them to operate on deck because of the smell. We also... try to slow them down by prop fouling their propellers and getting in water cannon battles with them. And in this last season, we were able to shut them down for 42 days, and that meant for the first time we were able to save more whales than they were actually able to kill. We saved 528, they killed 507. So in the next season, we intend to have a better record on that. Every year we get stronger, we get more resources, and become more effective.
All right, well, it's fantastic. This is something that on our show we've talked a lot about the scandals engulfing the global economy, and I was very looking forward to this interview because this is something that is, in my opinion, the brightest star on the horizon in terms of a group and a man, Captain Paul Watson, who is actually taking these guys head on. And it's an economic war. It's a war for survival of the species in many ways. Captain Paul Watson, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank my guest, Stacy Herbert, and, of course, Captain Paul Watson. If you'd like to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.